in life. So things like motivation, perseverance, tenacity are extremely important. And when we understand them, they actually are producing a lot of what we know. So abilities are important. Abilities are multiple in nature. And early family environments turn out also to be major predictors of these abilities. So we see a link. This has been known for generations. What we've learned in the recent years, though, is much better, both experimental evidence and non-experimental longitudinal evidence, understanding exactly what the role of the family is. So I'll try to show this. Now, the reason why I think it's important to understand the role of the family is that relative to our recent past, family environments have deteriorated. A greater fraction of children are born into environments that would be described as at-risk environments. There's a greater proportion of our workforce. The total fertility level has gone down. The family size is declining, and that's true across many socioeconomic groups. But what we're finding is that, in fact, that the children, the greater fraction of our children being born now are coming into families that are more at risk, where the children are more at risk, and this leads to a serious concern. Now, all this is somewhat speculative in some sense. I'm giving you some observations. I've looked at the relationship that many people, sociologists, psychologists, and economists have looked at, seeing a negative relationship between family status or a positive relationship between family status and achievement of the child. But what we also have is experimental evidence, and I want to summarize that. We have experimental evidence. There are a few selected experiments, some of which I'm reanalyzed and we'll talk about, that actually look at how it is that we can intervene and at least partially compensate for adverse early environments. So it's not all a negative story. And what we've learned from these experiments is that if we intervene early enough and effectively enough, we can affect cognitive, social-emotional abilities and the health of children. And that these interventions will essentially improve productivity, and they have very high rates of return. Now, the important message here, though, is that if we compare these policies to other policies, and that's what economics is all about. There's a lot of people working on things like early childhood. They've done important work. But where the economists can come in is we can compare the relative effectiveness of these policies with other policies that are frequently mentioned in the literature. So, for example, we hear frequently the notion about reduced pupil-teacher ratios, public job training, convict rehabilitation, tuition subsidies, or police. And I want to argue, if you look at the rate of return or the cost-benefit, that we get much higher returns for these programs, these early intervention programs, than we do for some of these more traditional approaches. And so we need to refocus policy. So let me just show very briefly. I'm going to have to apologize to my friends in the economics department. I'm going to duplicate a little bit of what I said today, but I won't be too much. What we've learned is that these non-cognitive traits are very important. And so by non-cognitive traits, I mean things like motivation, sociability, attention, self-regulation, self-esteem, time preference, health, and mental health. These are traits that frequently do not receive such attention. So let me go back to the GEDs. And here I'll just tell you, we know about the GEDs. The GEDs are dropouts. These are people who couldn't finish high school. They just can't finish. And it turns out they can't finish a bunch of tasks. So if you look at the way the GEDs perform in the Army, if you look at the way the GEDs perform in marriage, you look at the way the GEDs perform in a range of tasks, these are people who have difficulty finishing things. They have lack of motivation, if you will. So how can we measure the GED? And the GED is a perfect laboratory for American social policy. I think it's a wonderful lab. I'm writing a little book, actually, with Paul LaFontaine on exactly this topic. But take a look at this here. This is looking at the AFQT. This is a measure from a random sample of American population. This is the Armed Forces Qualifying Test. And what you see here is basically the distribution of scores for, this is males and females, age adjusted in terms of the score on the AFQT test. So this is what high school graduates earn, high school graduate abilities look like. And that's where GEDs line in the distribution. The two of them are just right on top of each other. And if you look at black males, black females, same thing. Hispanic males, Hispanic females, same thing. So this means, by the standards that we currently adopt for educational policy evaluation, the GED is a very great test, right? It succeeds. They're equally able. Yet, GEDs are earning at the rate of high school dropouts. They're performing like dropouts, and in some ways even worse than dropouts. They're a little smarter than dropouts who don't take the GED, but they're actually not doing so well. So something else is there. And I'm going to argue that something else is socio-emotional skills. So the GEDs are as smart as ordinary high school graduates. They lack non-cognitive skills. And you probably know GEDs. Maybe some of you are GEDs. I'm not sure. But the GEDs are the wise guys who really can't finish anything. And there's a lot of evidence that both cognitive and non-cognitive skills are important. Let me show you just some other evidence on this subject. And this is some work I did with several graduate students, former graduate students at Chicago. So if we look at something that has received a lot of attention in psychology, we look at the ability. So Richard Herrnstein has written books on this subject, along with Wilson, about the fact that crime is caused by the low ability people. So here you see the drop-off. If you go from the left to the right on this graph, on the left you see a low ability, and up here you get the highest ability, and you get a drop-off. The probability of being arrested, or being in jail, I should say, by age 30, definitely falls off cognitive ability. But if you look at measures of non-cognitive ability, you get that also there's a dramatic drop-off. And in fact, it's even more dramatic from the lowest decile to the 21st decile. So non-cognitive ability plays a major role. Same thing is true in teenage pregnancy. Cognitive and non-cognitive ability equally important in this sense of explaining the drop-off from teenage pregnancy. These are teenage girls, and the risk that they will have a child out of wedlock draws down dramatically if you go to the top of the distribution. So again, both types of abilities are important, but American public policy focuses on those. Let me just show you the wage distribution. This is basically showing what log wages are. And we can go up then from the lowest to the highest level of non-cognitive and cognitive ability, and we get huge increases in wages. That's in logs, so that's like more than 100% doubling of the wage. Okay, so I've already explained to you that controlling for ability, minorities are more likely to attend college. So ability is important. Ability explains a lot of aspects of human behavior. Now, that's Exhibit A. Exhibit B is that gaps in abilities that play such an important role are opening up very early in the lives of children. This is something only recently we've come to fully understand. And what we've also found is that some of the factors that receive so much attention in public policy discussion, like schooling, are playing only a minor role in alleviating or creating these gaps. So things like pupil-teacher ratios, teacher salaries, really are playing only a very minor role. So let me give you an example of this. This is a graph showing the rank in an overall distribution by age of children from the bottom, from starting at age 6 up to age 12. The graphs are similar up to age 18. I'll show you a few of those a little bit later. But what we see is basically a pattern which suggests that kids from the top, the most advantaged kids, highest income quartile, are showing fairly high scores, and their scores are increasing, their ranks, the rank between them and the bottom. But what you also see, and this is kind of a parallelism here. There's a gap here. These are kids from the second highest quartile, so these are not extremely well-to-do, but still fairly well off. Then we get kids from the second income quartile and those from the bottom. So we can definitely see that after kids start school, these gaps are opening up a little bit. But the major story here, I think, is that the gap, even at age 6, is huge, right? Big gaps are opening up long before kids are entering school. And there's some pulling apart here, so I don't want to minimize that, but there is some pulling apart. What I will also show you